All right, so talking a little bit about the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, or DFARS. You're probably pretty familiar with that already, and if not, then by the end of this, I think that you will be. One of the things that we're going to be talking about today specifically is going to be the 800-171 controls, and talking a little bit about those families that are in there is going to get the conversations going for us. And specifically decomposing the 252.204-7012, safeguarding covered defense information and cyber incident reporting. So we're going to share some, for the past 2 years, we've helped out a bunch of customers here in town, and really it's been a pretty good book of business for us to be able to take some of the commercial side of the house efforts that we do and start to put them into helping customers not get compromised. So when we start to talk a little bit about it, 2 years ago, whenever we first started building the Vulnerability Genius, it was there were really no tools out there that specifically helped with DFARS and that were really nice for the implementation of any of the NIST controls. There's a SCAPS compliance checker. There's various tools that are out there that were kind of lame. So we webified it and put it together. And now this is an offering that has been pretty popular amongst customers. We got a little carrot dangling out there with the free tool to allow people to get their taste buds wet a little bit, and then various packages for customers that the Vulnerability Genius does. And at the end of our assessments, what we do is we give a letter of attestation saying that we in fact stand behind everything that we've done, and based off of either the SSP or the POAMs that we provide you, we will help you get through any assessment that comes from DSS in the future. So that's a discriminator for us and our customer set. Really, when it comes down to it, we try to do what we all know and love with our training in the past, trying to protect the most critical things that we have in our organization. Typically, we use the layers of the onion approach. So the defense in depth, it's really fairly straightforward. If you have something that's special, something that's meaningful for you, like data or like some of the exercises that we'll do here in a few minutes, then how are you going to put these layers of onions around that to hopefully at a lower cost be able to protect yourself in a way that is meaningful and repeatable? That's probably the most difficult thing for a lot of our customers out there, is they don't have the repeatable components in there, and we help with the automation. So through policies and procedures, security awareness, putting in physical controls, anything with the network perimeter and specifics inside of the LAN, getting down to any host-based solutions. Also, configuring Tomcat or Apache, IIS down at the application level, and then being able to protect the data is probably one of the most important things. So if you look at any of the guidance that we see out there, really we're trying to make sure that we protect ourselves and our information. So not only to hopefully thwart getting egg in our face, but also because we want to make sure we have integrity. And really, breaches in security can cost us contracts and a lot of dollars to try to mitigate risk specifically. So when we get down to it, what does that mean? That means that a lot of the things that we practice, especially in this scenario, if we look at the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, a lot of times whenever we go in and meet with customers, it's really focused on not only the layered approach of the security onion, but the holy trinity, if you will, of information security, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it comes to life when we talk about OPM. And really, there's a ton of federal employees as well as the federal contractors. If you recall, 41 million folks a few years ago were compromised and leaked out from OPM. And as recently as Equifax, which is an absolute disgrace, that they say half of America information is now in the hands of someone, and they're not 100% sure who that is. Well, the government has really gotten sick and tired of that. And if you just take a look at this is a slide that I've been using for a little while here. This slide is on the left-hand side. It shows assets that we have. Meaning we, the United States government, a drone, stealth bomber, it looks like, some sort of weapon here, and I probably should take out that name, but then also a fighter jet. And then over here are the Chinese assets that conveniently look almost identical to everything that we have spent tons and tons of money doing the R&D, prototyping, failing, throwing more money at it, bringing it to life. And really that just comes with people not being able to put controls in place to keep their controlled, unclassified information protected. And one of the reasons why now we are seeing DFARS in everything that's being released. And if you're competing on a lot of those new contracts that are coming out, or even existing contracts, really it comes down to who's going to pay for that. And the government is pushing that back to the contractors. So from a contractor's perspective, how can we try to make sure that we're doing this in a cost-effective way that hopefully is not confusing? And this is usually the look right here, this guy, that we get from a lot of customers whenever we're called in. Usually they're not information security professionals, or if they are, then they need some guidance on how to interpret different controls or different postures that they may have currently. But if you are doing business with the federal government or you have the contract vehicles, then you have to be DFARS compliant by the end of the year. And that means that you got to be able to protect the controlled, unclassified information that we've been talking about. And now it brings us to probably the biggest question here is, what do I do? What do I do? Well, most of the people that we're meeting with go and look up the 800-171 and they try to just go with what they know. They try to interpret and figure out for themselves. But really what we're seeing is that there's a huge gap based off of specific expertise within the organizations. So maybe each and every one of you in here that are experts for your organization, maybe your expertise is network security and maybe not identity management, or maybe it's personnel security and not access control. So there are some blind spots, and typically what we're doing is either we're coming in and doing a full assessment and then helping with mitigations, or we come in after someone thinks that they've already locked it down and helping them to identify any gaps or blind spots in the organization. And really, I don't know if you guys are still having the problems that we're seeing out there, but finding people that are knowledgeable that can actually implement these controls is one of the biggest hurdles that companies are seeing. So going out there, getting consultants that really know what they're talking about is still very difficult to find. So if you're looking to do it yourself, hopefully we can pretend like we're Bob Vila or whoever else is out there, the DIY network, and hopefully be able to help you provide protection. So if you're having an object in the middle that you need protected, if you have a website that you need protected, if you have hosts that you need protected, or any infrastructure, then we can do that. And what we do is we come in and take a holistic approach, or really a naive approach at the security assessment. And really, we look at it as an audit. And for us, being able to offer 3 different categories here of security assessments really keeps us pretty busy. So if you just take a look here, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, these are typically things that we will help customers schedule for their risk assessment, making sure that the control that they have to put in place for the risk assessments or auditing and some of the reporting, that they at least have that on the radar in 2018. That way, if DSS does pay them a visit, they at least have a plan and a vision for their 2018 and beyond assessments and keeping up with making sure everything is compliant. And if you've not taken a look at some of these requirements, what I've done is just put them together in 2 slides here. There's access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability, configuration management, identification and authentication, incident response, maintenance, media protection, personnel security, physical protection, risk assessment, security assessment, system and communications protection, and systems and information integrity. So what we're finding is that customers typically have the awareness and training down pat. Typically, they go through with flying colors with the awareness and training. Usually the personnel security and the physical protection, those we can add to the list of families that almost carte blanche across the board for us whenever we're going out and doing assessments. Those are the 3 that typically all different companies out there come back and say, yep, we're compliant with that. Where people typically have the gaps are with audit and accountability, configuration management, identification and authentication, which is tightly coupled with access control, incident response, maintenance, and probably the biggest one that we see is media protection. That's usually the big dog that often leads to some fantastic discussions on how different projects need to protect their media. So what I'd like to do is just go through and do a quick little practical exercise here. And we're going to just have a little bit of fun here. So we have this big city, and it's going to be Manhattan in this case. We're looking to do a DFARS compliance audit on the city of Manhattan. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys what's going to be your approach, what vision are you going to have, how would you pitch it to the city, and what tools would you use in order to make this magic happen. So when we come down to it, we put the controls in place. A lot of times what you'll hear is to keep the honest person honest. You put the controls in place to keep the honest person honest. So I remember with DITSCAP, subsequently DIACAP, and now with RMF, it's really, in my opinion here, what separates a good engineer from an expert engineer, someone who can demand the top dollar in our business, is the level of documentation and their command of the English language. And specifically being able to put that down on paper. Not a lot of folks can transition what's in their head down on paper and make it sexy for managers to read it, which is a big deal. You got to get that management's approval. So we go back to what we started this conversation with, and in this case, it's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And applying this back to the checklist of the 14 families in the 800-171, specifically going into each of the 109 controls, gives us a good objective for tracing back each of these requirements that we're going to be audited for and tying it to one of these three main components of information security. So what we've done is we've made it fairly straightforward using our tool, and specifically asking the question, like someone had said earlier, you're protecting the information, the data, the information flow, and really the big questions here is how's the data processed, how's it stored, and how do we transmit it? And if we know those three facts, then we can figure out cost-effective solutions that hopefully can be relatively straightforward to implement and in a timely manner, which is important. So, what does that mean? Well, what we've done is with our tool, the Vulnerability Genius, we've come in and put together an assessment manager. And we give customers the opportunity to go in and do various assessments. And in this case, this seminar is about DFARS, but we've built it in a way that is control specific. So if you have a framework that you want to utilize and you're doing a vulnerability assessment, or maybe you're looking on the healthcare industry, it's not just limited to the 800-171. We've put in a lot of great frameworks to be able to utilize different controls for different businesses that are out there. The federal space, government space, or the federal government space, the healthcare, as well as financial. And by doing that, what we've done is given us a chance to be fairly flexible with helping to give customers their checklist, providing an automated POAM, and giving guidance on utilization of tools and ways that they can have the system security plan and a plan of action moving forward. So the next practical exercise that I want to talk about very briefly here is this one when it comes into one of those avenues that I said that a lot of organizations put in place and are already, whether it's for NISPOM or some of the FISMA controls that they have, maybe they're holding classified information, or they have an FSO. A lot of these physical security controls that come into play underneath the 800-171 3.10 control arena within DFARS really get you thinking. And these are specific guidance that we should look at. I always think about the gates, guards, and guns whenever it comes into talking about physical controls and 5 key topics that we look for. How can we deter? How can we delay? How can we detect, assess, and recover? And specifically being able to put some of these different options in each one of those, just to make sure that we're all on the same page here. We could deter by which one of these over here? How can we deter? Having A? All right. Sure, that could be A. What about delay?
C.
Okay. C. Somebody else said D. All right. What about detect? Okay. Probably also some sort of motion detection here. And assessing, we can probably have some sort of a guard would help us to assess. maybe some sort of testing or maintenance systems as well. And probably the recovery components are here down in the incident response plan. But really, we could shapeshift A through E and kind of move them interchangeably in each of these keywords. So that's just something to think about as you're moving forward. But typically what we'll do is when we come in, we have these practical exercises that we'll sit down with the customer and we'll meet with them to talk about physical security. So can you produce for us right now while we're on site as an auditor your physical security policies and procedures? What do you do to deter folks, delay, detect, assess, and recover? And usually customers are in pretty good shape with this specific control right here. This is one that I like to apply the science of physical protection to. And if you've been in seminars or classes before with us, you usually will have a pile of gold or a bank or something right here. But in this case, Fort Knox. And if you were put in control of security at Fort Knox, what would you do to try to delay, deter, detect, assess, and recover? What are some of the things that you may try to implement here? Well, if you take a look here, they got one way in, one way out. It's very open here all the way around. There's some really big gates with some serious looking razor wire on it, but it's very well lit. It has some bollards and some soldiers there protecting. And then inside of here, probably some biometrics as well as ID cards, some sort of two-factor authentication that can help us get to where we need to be. And speaking about access control, then working with customers, again, talking to them specifically about access control and identity management. What do you do to specifically protect technical access control, or possibly some of the controls for administrative or operational, like policies, procedures, like we said before. But then again, over here, physical control comes back into play. So we're seeing the convergence of physical and logical security here when we look at and take a peek under the hood of access control and identity management. Now, a lot of people are still using on-premise domain controllers. And because of that, typically you have someone who is the network administrator that can go on to the domain controller and provide you a Microsoft service that is a GPO edit or GPO audit, which is the group policy of that domain. And usually we want to see how that is documented, pushed down to the different clients that are out there. Typically, customers that are in an Active Directory domain, typically they have good control over the group policy, but whether or not they have control over each asset that is on their network is a different story. But in this case, this is just another way that we sit down with customers to be able to talk through this and just come up with some good brainstorming ideas. In this case right here, one of the biggest issues that we see is media protection. And each one of these cases that we have here are different scenarios that we've strategically put together that hopefully can meet your need or maybe your customer's needs. Multiple users within the IT department possess free reign over systems without any form of monitoring. This is probably one of the most typical scenarios that we see out there. Even though you may have a domain and group policies that are implemented, this is just a Wild West kind of mentality. That's not good, right? We got to have some sort of endpoint protection, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Network administrator may be filtering through the logs to cover up potential malicious activity. Well, that's not good news. We need to have some sort of way that we can protect against the insider threat, and hopefully being able to keep the integrity of these log files intact by having hashes or some sort of maybe tripwire installed that can detect any changes that are done by humans instead of processes or syslogs that are pumping through those. Application servers. This is usually something that a lot of folks don't understand, whether we were talking earlier about web servers or the like. And specifically here, this particular web or application developer decided that the project, he wanted to complete it by himself. So he developed the works all weekend and implements the code. Well, what happens? This is usually configuration management or some sort of non-approved change to a production application. And this right here, configuration management, is one of the biggest burdens for organizations that we go and do audits for. Do they have some sort of trouble ticket system? Do they have Jira or some sort of change management implemented? Can you see what's being changed? Can they provide a code review that shows that there's no introductions of malicious functions that are in there? The answer is typically no, and this is very, very typical of what we see in organizations. And then finally here for this media protection practical exercise, 4 reports were given to security regarding loss of sensitive paper files, key cards, and written down usernames and passwords, all of which belong to individual employees. Somebody's going to be getting their head on a roll right there. So what we do is we just sit down and talk about these scenarios, and typically customers have either all of these or 2 or 3 of them, so we can work through, and then it just kind of spawns a little bit of creative juices and
Hey Ben,
gets some artifacts.
Is that education, or is it to get information so you can provide the service, or is it both?
It's really to provide the service, but also so we can figure out what they currently have. So we audit, and by asking these questions, if a customer comes back and says, "Yeah, that sounds like us," then we know the posture of their system pretty quickly there. That's a great question, though. Usually that's what we'll see is we'll work with customers to try to put them into some of these buckets here. One of the things that we are asked to do with the 800-171 is also with our projects that we are trying to get compliant is to do a threat model. And over here I have this looks like a Motorola Droid, or maybe a Razor over here. If we were to do a threat model on this mobile device, or maybe the rocket in your pocket right now, that mobile device that's in there, what are the different ways that an attacker could steal your information? What are some of the ways that maybe we could get on this device or be able to take that sensitive information? In this case right here. And strategically, there's a reason why we use a mobile device, is because without you telling us classified information or specifics about your projects, everybody's got a mobile device. And so immediately we can enumerate different things, kind of like someone said over here earlier. What are the connections or interconnections? Here we got, Bluetooth could be one. Another one could be Wi-Fi. over here we could do 4G LTE network, maybe some sort of Google Drive, or are they using Box.net or Dropbox or OneDrive on here? Most people, if they are using the BYOD, bring your own device, usually what we see is in a Microsoft world, they'll have the OneDrive corporate installed on their device, but then also be linked into iTunes or iPhotos or Google Drive to back up photos on that device that they're also looking at corporate email. Do they connect back to a corporate LAN in some way? And that could be through Office 365 or through a VPN on your smart device. What about a sync with a laptop? Does it sync with the laptop or a desktop? So there's a bunch of different avenues that immediately, when we all could look at this threat model for a cell phone, that, okay, well now let's take a look at my system that we're currently trying to implement, and now we can go through and create a threat model for that. Well, Microsoft, and I can't believe that I'm actually saying this, Microsoft makes a free tool. Yeah, Microsoft and free, those usually don't go together, right? And in this case, they make this threat modeling tool. So what we usually will do is we'll work with the customers to get just a generic kind of topology and come in and create a threat model of their boundary that they're in control of. And what you can do is, if you have, let's say, a web application or a virtual machine, it's got a cool canvas here that we can just drag and drop, kind of like a Visio, and put things in here that are probably very similar to assets that you have. In this case, right here, maybe you're running a virtual machine, right? The virtual machine has a web app and a SQL database on it. All right, let me just put this right here. So these guys are all running on the same boundary here. And so what do? Well, we put a little machine trust boundary here. I'm sorry, hold on. We put a little, let's just, for convenience purposes here, or brevity purposes, we put this on here. So what I'll do is I'll just make a little boundary around this. And one of the cool things about this here is once we make some connections here, let's say that I want to make an HTTP connection. I'm doing this on purpose here. So the HTTP would come to the web application. Maybe there's an IPsec tunnel between the web app and the backend database here. Hopefully there is. Well, what do? Well, now what we can do is we can actually run a full report or create a full report of this right here and be able to show the threat boundary here. I'll put it on my desktop here so you can see it. And what it does is, voila, lickety split, it'll produce this cool little threat diagram report and show you the Microsoft Stride model. So if you're not familiar with that, you can look it up, and basically it sees if using the Microsoft model here, it is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, integrity, denial of service or DOS, and enumeration, I think is the last one here. But using that stride model, now we can apply the stride model to the threat model that we have, and hopefully give the customer very, very quickly something back that hopefully is meaningful to them. So that's the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool, and that's one way that you can go in and do something fairly quickly for customers. All right, so what does that mean? Well, that means that you could have something like this, that maybe if you're using Amazon Web Services, different data flows. Basically, we talked earlier about how's the information processed, how's it transmitted, how is it used, and by defining those, we can come in generically, put it into this threat model, and lickety-split get that nice report back to us. That's kind of super cool and free, which is the best part, right? Yeah.
How hard is it to get to the point where you can use those tools? I mean, how hard is it to get to the point where you can get the answers to the questions and how it all is connected so that you can do your analysis? Do you find that it's really difficult with your customers?
Usually they're using these practical exercise approach, like going in and catching the customers off guard. We can get enough data to actually put each one of these objects and make it reality. So by sitting with them, taking pretty copious notes and entering it into the tool, we can come back and it's not very difficult to produce these right here.
It almost sounds like you're playing detective versus auditor. I mean, an auditor, you would think, I don't know that much about it, but I would think that you would generally meet with somebody that's pretty well informed. You look at all their stuff and you go like this and like this.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're dealing with is people that don't have that at the start, so you got to pull it out of them.
That's it.
Through the techniques that you use, which is pretty savvy way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Usually, just to give you an idea, usually it takes us anywhere from soup to nuts. It'll take a pretty good amount of time to help customers out. All right, so what does that mean? Well, what we usually will do is kind of like we were just talking about. After we go through and meet with the customers, we do what's the requirements. The requirements are, in this case, the 14 families, the 109 controls. That's the framework that we're using in this case. What do? Well, we'll come in and provide the automated assessment and provide the customer with this issues and results as well as reporting page. Let me see if I have it up here. Yeah, I do. So in this case right here, what we do is we provide the customer with the various issues that they may have. This customer had some problems with access control, audit and accountability, security assessment, configuration management, contingency planning, identification, authentication. So basically enumerating each of the controls that are out there, personnel security, risk assessments. There's a couple of unknowns here that maybe they didn't fill in for this particular. So those would be things that we need to go back and meet with the customer again and figure out what those gaps are still within that audit to make sure that we have everything we need to be successful for that. And to provide them with that letter of attestation that I was telling you about earlier, that really gets us to this final thing that I'm going to talk about, is the poem. And specifically, the things that are up here, how do we create it, is probably, if you've not done this before, it's fairly straightforward. So fear not. Really trying to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor any corrective efforts. So typically, we'll come back and tell you that your baby's ugly, and then we'll tell you how ugly it is by how many poems we have. So in one of the cases of one of the recent customers, they had almost half of the 109 controls were deficiencies. So now what we've done is we put together the POAM and the SSP to show the vision for the future on how long they think it's going to take. They're aware that they have the issues and how long they think it's going to take. That way, if they do get audited, they show that they've done their due diligence and can provide that information to the auditing body, like DSS. In this case right here, the ISO would be the person that it comes up with which ones are our priorities. And typically, what we've been trying to do in any of the training seminars that we do is we try to get customers to adopt security to the left of the life cycle. So it's been shown, studies have shown that it's 10 times more the amount of money that you spend if you implement it or try to bolt on the security solution at the end of the project rather than implement it inside of the project as you're going along. So we try to push it to the left of the life cycle and try to include that requirement in hopefully moving forward for these customers. And really the biggest question that a lot of folks have is, when do I have to submit the POAM? Well, if you have any question on whether or not you need to, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and do it. Just go ahead and document it. Make sure that you have it documented, that you are aware that you have that issue, and then if you do get audited, then you can at least show that artifact. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is the incident response procedures, and specifically the ability to be able to report rapidly to the DibNet in 72 hours of any incident that comes to life as you're going through and doing your assessment or trying to comply with it. And what we've done is in our tool, what we've done is we've put together an incident manager that allows customers to go into the Vulnerability Genius and then add specific incidents based off of the DFARS regulations that they say you need to add these specific fields for each incident. And what our next step is to work with DibNet to allow our system to connect to theirs and submit this to theirs under a secure connection. So being able to complete that food chain as far as information flow. So we're excited about that. But if you've not seen the incident reporting on the DibNet, you can go out and check that out. But really, I think that that's everything that we wanted to cover today, and hopefully you had a chance to learn a few things. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us here at the number on the screen. Any questions?